I think I was always a little rambunctious. And, I remember when I went to the first week I was at this boarding school, and I said, I want to break every rule there is. And the one girl immediately moved out of the room. But that was my outlook on life. I was not going to be a rule follower. I was not going to live in a little house with a white picket fence. I was not going to accept my limitations. I'm Cameron McDonald, and I'm an oil painter.
Cameron McDonald is living proof that rules are optional. She walked away from security over and over, chasing adventure and wonder. She's fearless, and at 86 years old, hilarious and completely unforgettable.
Everything changed. The art school, when I first went in, I was one among 100. The second year I was there, they had selected 9 of us. I decided after my second year at Washington University, I thought, I've got to get close to New York, as close as I can get to New York. And my parents said no, there was no way they were going to send me to New York. So I landed on, I knew about the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, so that was close to New York. And so it was really shoved in my face that, by getting a scholarship to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, I think finally convinced me I must be fairly good. There was a painter who was a teacher and named Hobson Pittman. We would paint all week and just take our paintings in to be criticized on Fridays. So one Friday I took in my painting and Hobson Pittman went wild about me. He said, "You have to live in an ivory tower. You can do nothing but paint." And I realized that I had a responsibility, literally a responsibility to continue painting. And from that point on, that critique changed everything. And I became a painter, a real painter. And here we are. When I got out of school, naturally, I could not make a living painting. And I remember that sort of shock when I got out of art school, like, hey, babe, the whole thing changes now because you cannot afford to paint every day. And I was in New York. I finally had convinced my parents that that's where I belonged. And so my film career started with, we used to have something called the Yellow Pages. So I got to Where's That Film? And there was and I thought, I'll just call all these companies and see if I can get a job. So I rang up the first one that I came to, and they said, yeah, we have an opening. And Andre Moulin was the owner, very good-looking guy, really good-looking guy. He had me in his office for an interview. So I had a red suit on and so I thought I'll pull the skirt up just a little bit because I just knew he was that type. He gave me the job, and I worked there for years. And I had stayed at the Barbizon Hotel with Sylvia Plath and Joan Didion, and so I began to meet people. Francis Coppola I met, and Yoko Ono came to a party of mine and showed her movies and so forth. And I was just in the thick of things from the very beginning. Francis Coppola surprised me the most. He flew in one time and had me in a taxi. It was the first time he had a movie, in a theater in New York. So he picked me up, and we had to drive around and around in a taxi to look at the marquee. You're a big boy now. Anyway, so that was my acquaintance with Francis, was driving around in taxis. Ultimately, I ended up working for Frank Perry on a picture called Doc. One of the props was Wyatt Earp's gun, and I had to carry this damn gun around. Wyatt Earp, it was the real thing, the real gun he used. So that was an adventure. And after I got through working with Frank, I decided to go to England. And in England, I worked for Warner Brothers. And film carried on for quite a few years. And I started traveling to Belfast and Beirut, and I'd gotten very interested in politics. So I did some writing about the troubles that were going on and interviewed quite a few people and so forth when I was there. I was really trying to get to the IRA, but that was a little more difficult than I had imagined, right? The IRA, they controlled me when I was in Belfast. Believe me, they controlled me. I left, went back to London, and there was a guy who said, would you like to come to Beirut? I said, yes. This guy took me. I was engaged to him, and we never married, but he was the father of my son. Anyway, my son was born, and I said, now what do I do? I mean, I've always been a great survivor. And so I thought, I'll open a nursery. And I opened a nursery, and it was very successful. And I became engaged again to a Sassoon, a fellow who was a Sassoon. All of a sudden, he had this incredible crush on me. He wanted to marry me, but I wasn't in love with him, and he didn't like my son, so it wasn't gonna work. Edward scared me, being a Sassoon. He had a lot of power. And I thought, I better leave London. You know, this is strange. So I decided to go live in France, and went to France and loved it. Just absolutely loved it. I found my home. And I drew the whole time the 6 years I was in France. I drew and had some success in galleries and so forth. And when I came back to California, I actually started using color again and oil pastels, and that led to oil painting and so forth. And that's the story of my life. I've been painting ever since. Yeah, I came back to America in 1981. So I was away for about 11 years. I never was at a point where I couldn't survive. I mean, there have been low points, but nothing that I couldn't survive. When I was raising Charlie, I worked a job and came home at night and painted at night, and I managed. It still doesn't feel like it was a burden. Nothing felt like it was a burden, except I didn't much like the job I had, but it was tolerable. My mother had MS, and you know, she was very gallant about MS. She may not have liked art, but she managed to have a beautiful home. And there was always sunlight in her life until the very end. And she was so brave. She was just incredibly brave. And she'd redecorate the house every time she turned around. She was redecorating. And she'd have the workmen literally carry her up the stairs so she could tell them what to do. I mean, she was amazing, right? She instilled in me a stability that nothing could shake, and I attribute my mother with that, and that always stood by me. I got my sense of mischief from my dad. I remember when I graduated, my mother was too ill to come to my graduation, and my father came, and we were in chapel. We were singing a hymn, and he would go off tune, you know, on purpose. So he was still living his boarding school days as well, you know, and that's the type of person he was. And he supported me wholeheartedly. He never gave up on me. I remember when my father died and I was left some money, and my mother had already passed away as well. I knew I had enough money to buy a house, to settle down, and to paint or do anything I wanted, or to go and travel and see the world. And I said to myself, you know, you're taking away your retirement money. This is money where you could have a stable life and a house, or you could go see the world. And I knew the risk I was taking, that the end may not work out, and things could go awry. And I decided to go ahead and take a chance. I was so devastated by my father's death, I had to get the hell out of anywhere that was familiar. And I literally, after the funeral, I just got on an airplane and left. It was so horrendous to me. I was terribly affected. Picasso was 93 when he quit painting.
You have a long way to go.
Yeah, quite a few years. It's freedom, no matter where you are, no matter what the trap you're in, no matter how you're contained. You know, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, you know, it's your freedom, literally. Right now we're dealing with ego. And it's not like pride or anything like that. Ego is a psychological term, and it's part of the brain. And the id is also a part of the brain. But the id is the unconscious. Like when you're painting, Amy, do you notice that that you kind of lose your track of your thoughts and that's the zone. That's what I'm talking about. You just sort of lose yourself in it, and you're not really conscious. Your hand just moves, just automatically moves and does something. And that's the id moving it. That takes over, the brain just takes over, shifts over to the id. It's freedom. I never think of that I had to learn anything the hard way. But what I would tell a young artist, you either do it or you don't. But if you do it every day. It's not anything you can escape from. It's their job. It's their profession. It's what they do. It's what they are. I am a painter. I am a painter.